10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 204. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 204 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. I hope everybody is doing okay out there, hanging in there through this tough situation that we are facing. We will try to distract you as best we can, get you on your instrument, and get you working on some brand new stuff. So the outpouring of support on Patreon continues. I have to thank all of you for that support. Really means the world to me in this tough time where so much of my living is off the table. Really rely on large gatherings of people to make a large portion of the income. And thank you guys so much for really showing that support on Patreon. I've got some new members to thank. Thank you to Peter, Jerry, Richard, David, Deborah, and Wilf. Thank you guys so much for signing up to support the show. And of course, to all of our longtime supporters, we thank you as well. That really means the world to us, especially now. If you'd like to sign up to become a member of the Patreon family, you will get a PDF that accompanies every single episode that we put out in all keys. And really, you can develop a pretty deep jazz library so that whenever you are looking for something to work on, you can always come back to those PDFs and find something relevant. You can do that by going over to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, and signing up to show your support. $3 a month is all it costs you for all those fantastic rewards. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So this month we are going to do a deep dive on the bebop scale. So we're going to start by talking about some of the lesser used bebop scales and how you can form a bebop scale over all of the common chords that we see in jazz standards and that are used in the jazz language. And then as we go through these episodes, what we're really going to get into is application of the bebop scale. And I think that's going to be the real valuable part of this for most of you, is how do we use it? How do we approach this device and use it in a way that sounds natural and melodic and all those descriptors that we want for our playing? I think a lot of people get hung up on basically just using the bebop scale from the root and playing it in a very prescribed way. We're going to talk about some different ways to do it. But before we get into that part of it, I think what we need to do is we need to talk about how to form the bebop scale over the most common types of chords that we see. Most of us, we only know the bebop scale as being over a dominant chord, right? But there are actually a lot of other applications for the bebop scale to get that chromaticism in your sound over just about any chord that you're going to see in a lot of the jazz standards out there. So what we're going to go over in this episode is 5 of the most common chords that you will ever see when you play jazz and how to form a bebop scale over each one of those. So this is going to give you the foundation for everything that we're going to do after this, and you will basically have a bebop scale up your sleeve for pretty much any chord that you ever see. And I say pretty much because there's always going to be outliers. Okay, so let's jump right into the first bebop scale. So the first one we're going to go over is a major bebop scale. You can use this over any major 7 chords that you see, or a lot of times you'll see 6 chords. Works really well over those. If you see a 6-9 chord, it works really well over that as well. And basically what we're doing is we're putting a passing tone in between the 6th degree of the scale and the 5th degree of the scale. So this is going to be the first thing you see on your PDF, and we're just going to use the key of C for every single example that we go through so you can really see the difference between these chords. So if we're in the key of C, when we put a passing tone between the 6th and the 5th, we are putting an A flat into that scale. Normally there is not an A flat in a C major scale. We are putting it in there to give us that chromaticism and form that first bebop scale. This is what it sounds like. All right, so there's our first chord, major 7, major 6, 6, 9. All those different chord symbols, this scale really works over those. Okay, so the second one is the most common. Most of you probably already know this, but it is a dominant chord. So we put the passing tone in between the root and the flatted 7th in this. So again, if we have a C7, we're going to put a B natural into that scale, and then we get that nice chromaticism in between the root and the 7th. Sounds like this. All right, let's move on to the third most common chord, which is a minor 7 chord. And we're going to put the passing tone in the exact same place in a minor 7 chord. So we're going to put it between the root and the flat 7. So if we had a C minor 7, again, we're using a B natural in between the C and the B flat. So this is kind of nice. This is like exactly what we just did, only minor. So a very small difference between the dominant and this. It sounds like this. Okay, so now we move into a minor 7 flat 5 chord. So this one is one that's often overlooked when it comes to bebop scales, and I get a lot of questions from my students on, well, what should I do over this if I want to incorporate some chromaticism into this, not sure where to put it. So let's talk about exactly where to put it. We're actually going to put it in the same place. So in between the root and the flat 7. Now, we have to remember that when we're using a minor 7 flat 5, what it really is it's the 7th mode of a major scale, right? So if we're looking at C minor 7 flat 5, we're going to be using the key signature of D flat major to form this scale. Key signature of D flat major, but we just start on a C and play that scale. And I hope that's not confusing to a lot of you. We've talked about modes a little bit, so hopefully most of you have a grasp on that. But I just want you to know how we formed the rest of the scale is basically what I'm trying to convey here. But exact same passing point, we use the major 7 in between the root and the flat 7. So if we have a C minor 7 flat 5 chord, a C half diminished chord, then we're going to insert a B natural in there. So here's what this scale sounds like. Okay, and now we have just one more chord, and this is a really common chord, a dominant 7 flat 9 chord. And what we're going to do is, when we're using a bebop scale over this, we are also going to use the flat 13. It just really fits into the sound. And you have to remember, like, okay, I know what a lot of you are going to say. You're going to say, well, aren't we supposed to use the diminished dominant over this? Well, yes, but that's actually just one flavor that you can use over this. You can use altered. You can use this bebop scale. Consider this bebop scale just another flavor that you can use over a dominant 7 flat 9 chord. So we are going to put the passing tone in the exact same place. Are you starting to notice a theme here? We're really putting the major 7 as a passing tone in most of these bebop scales. In fact, we're doing it in all of them except for the first one. So the only other weird thing about this one is, remember, we're going to use that flat 13 or flat 6, and then we also have to use a flat 9. So we're going to be modifying this scale in a couple different ways. We're adding a B natural to it, then we're adding an A flat to it, and then we're also making sure that we play that D flat, which is the flat 9. It's a really interesting sounding scale, a really cool sounding scale, in my opinion. Here's what it sounds like. Now, there's actually a ton of chromaticism in that scale, even outside of just that, initial chromatic passing tone. Very, very cool sounding scale due to all the chromaticism. Look at your PDF and try to pick out all of the half steps in that scale. And you notice that there's quite a few of them, which is really cool. Okay, so you'll also notice on your PDF that I've given you some instructions at the bottom. I want you to learn all the bebop scales from the root, then from the third, then from the fifth, then from the seventh. And that is really important because we need flexibility with these scales. We need flexibility with every single melodic and harmonic device that we use in jazz. We don't want to be forced into a box where we can only play these scales from the root. So I want you to try practicing them full scales from all the different chord tones. Now, I know what you're going to say to me, Nick, that's like a couple of years of work. And you'd be right. You'd be right about that. So I'm going to give you a shortcut. All right. What we're going to do next week is we are going to put these scales into action over the first 8 measures of There Will Never Be Another You. That's where we're going to start actually applying this stuff. So here's your homework for this week. Once you understand the way that these scales work, I want you to go through the first 8 bars of There Will Never Be Another You, and I want you to practice it from every chord tone. Take every chord, figure out what bebop scale goes along with that chord, and practice it ascending and descending from root, third, fifth, and seventh. That's your homework. I know that's a lot of work, but it's a heck of a lot less work than taking 5 chords and bringing it through all 12 keys in that same fashion. All right, so we'll take a shortcut. We'll just learn it over 8 bars of a tune. And then next week, I'm going to apply some of this stuff to that first 8 bars, which means that you will be ready for what I'm going to show you next week. Okay, so that's about it. You've got your homework. Hopefully you understand what's going on with all of these different chord types, and hopefully you work on these. If you've got any questions, make sure you ask them in the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Community Facebook group. I'm always checking that constantly. Got a lot of people posting really cool stuff over there. And I think you might want the PDF to this episode, because if you want to go back through what I just explained and actually have the sheet in front of you, it will make a lot more sense. So remember, you can get that PDF by going to 10minutejazzlesson.com, clicking on one of the Patreon banners, get yourself signed up. $3 a month gets you all that stuff. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I hope everybody's staying healthy and safe out there, and we'll talk to you next week with some brand new episodes. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye.